Hey guys, it's Abdul, your favorite political writer, political commentator, and all the other fun stuff. Taking a few minutes today. It is November 11th. So, by the way, first of all, Happy Veterans Day to all you veterans out there. People like my dad, my wife, and of course my brother. Always appreciate the service and dedication they did to this country, so we can have these debates and conversations on these places like social media. I'm coming to you from my office here at WIBC here on Monument Circle. And so what I wanted to do was take a few minutes to talk to you guys about the whole issue of teacher pay. And if you have a question, you are free to kind of chime in and type it up at the bottom. I got a couple things going on here. I got my Facebook thing on my phone here, and also got my laptop, desktop computer right here. And there seems to have been a lot of discussion lately on my social media pages about this whole issue of teacher pay. Obviously, there's going to be a big rally at the State House on the 19th, which is next Tuesday. Hi, Scott. Appreciate you chiming in there and saying hello. It's going to be a big deal, big whoop-de-doo, and a lot of teachers from a lot of school districts from across the country are going to show up and protest, or at least make their voices heard, and one of those things is about the issue of teacher pay. But I think part of the problem with the whole teacher pay issue is, like a lot of things, it's more complicated than people think. And the problem is, when things get complicated, people want simplistic answers for very complicated type issues. And I think there are a couple things that you all need to keep in mind when we talk about the issue of teacher pay. First and foremost, it is not the state of Indiana that determines how much teachers get paid. It is the school districts. The school districts and the teachers' unions that the school districts negotiate with, those are the ones who determine teacher pay and who determine teacher salary. The state does not do that. All the state does is provide the funding for the operational costs of schools, which is about $8,000 and some change per student. Now, there's some other things in there. The student has special needs or comes from an economically challenged environment. Those school districts get more money because obviously those kids take more to educate than do quote-unquote regular kids. But the state of Indiana has nothing to do with teacher salary, only to the extent that the state is what funds education. That's just the operational costs. Now, let's take a look at that operational cost number, because I went and did some, made myself a few notes. Last year, school districts across the state of Indiana spent $5.5 billion in salary and benefits. And that figure comes from the Indiana Fiscal Policy Institute, $5.5 billion in salary and benefits. Out of that $5.5 billion, less than half, 47% exactly, went to teachers in the classroom. So, ponder that. Schools spent $5.5 billion last year, on salaries. Less than half, 47%, went to classroom teachers. Now, why do I bring this up? I'm just saying, hey, these are just what the facts are. You can draw your own conclusion as to what you think these mean. But I think that's extremely important to keep in mind, that when we talk about, teachers and teacher pay and who determines and what goes where, less than half of the $5.5 billion that is spent. And these figures are according to the Indiana Fiscal Policy Institute. They're very nonpartisan, straightforward. A lot of people rely on their numbers and their data for that point. So just kind of keep that in mind. So that's kind of point number one. Point number two to keep in mind is there's a lot of talk lately about the average teacher's salary in Indiana. And when we talk about the average teacher's salary, once again, we're talking about an average. We're talking about a teacher versus a teacher in Indianapolis versus a teacher in Paoli versus a teacher in Hamilton County. Now, the average teacher salary here in the state of Indiana is about $50,000, actually $50,554. That's the average teacher salary. Now, as I pulled my little chart up here, when I talked about Indiana teacher compensation, which, by the way, there was a compensation report done back in 2017. You can go find it online. The current teacher salary, like I said, right now, the minimum average salary is about 36 grand. The maximum average salary is about 67 grand. And the lowest salary reported was 30. The highest reported was 90. So there's a range of teacher salaries out there. But what's important, I think, is when you talk about teacher salaries, it's important that you factor in this thing called cost of living. That is extremely important, because remember, it's never what you make, it's what you take home. What is your take-home pay? And that's something I think, once again, that when we have these conversations about teacher pay, people tend to forget. For example, I know there's one of the big things people like to throw, well, Illinois teachers make 61 grand a year while Ohio teachers make on average 57. That is true. But once again, it's perspective. And that perspective can sometimes change things around. Does the average, for example, does the average Illinois teacher make more than the average Indiana teacher? Yes, on paper. Because remember, Indiana teacher's average salary, 50 grand a year. Average teacher salary for an Illinois teacher is 61. But guess which state has a higher cost of living? Exactly. Matter of fact, actually, if you're a teacher in Indiana, you're actually kind of making out a little bit better than your Illinois counterparts. Because guess what? If you're an Indiana teacher and you move to Illinois, let's say you just went 110 miles across the border to work in Illinois, to make that same salary, when you factor in cost of living and taxes and mortgages and food and all the other stuff, you have to make $67,000 a year in Illinois if you're an Indiana teacher to have that same salary. So ponder that for just a moment here. Like I said, when we talk about salaries and when we talk about money, it's more complicated than people think. So if people say, look, Illinois teachers make a lot more than Indiana teachers, yeah, but the cost of living is a whole lot more. And like I said, if you're an Indiana teacher, you make 50 grand a year, if you move to my home state of Illinois, you have to make at least $67,000 to maintain that same quality of life. And what's the average salary for an Illinois teacher? Oh, look, it's 61. So theoretically, when we factor in cost of living, you as an Indiana teacher are making a whole lot more money than your Illinois counterparts. Something else to keep in mind, too, I thought was interesting. We talk about, that cost of living. Indiana has approximately, we'll say about 300 school districts and some change. The challenge with all that is we break up these school districts into urban, suburban, and rural. And so, once again, when we look at these school districts and we look at teacher pay, we have to double check, ladies and gentlemen, where people work, because where people work is also determinative of what their salary is going to be. And obviously, the cost of living in a rural area in Indiana tends to be a lot less than in an urban area and in a suburban area. And since there are 205 rural school districts, 42 urban, and 57 suburban, then guess what? When we start looking at those numbers in the aggregate, it's probably going to be on the lower side, because guess what? It costs less to live in a rural area than it does in a city and it does in suburbia. Once again, what's the whole point of this? I'm not making a judgment call one way or the other. I'm just basically telling you these are what the facts and the data show. And we can't have an intelligent conversation about ways to increase teacher pay. Thank you, Bill Davis. It's always good to see you too, my friend. Like I said, I'm kind of watching the little monitor here on my telephone while I have my data up here on my desktop screen. But getting back to the bigger point is you can't have a conversation about teacher pay and what teachers make unless you're willing to be honest about the data. And we have to look at the data in context and look at the data in perspective. Now, you knew eventually this was going to come up, the whole issue of charters and vouchers and the like, because a lot of people say, well, if we didn't spend money on charter schools and voucher programs, we'd have more money for Indiana teachers. Well, not necessarily. You see, because I recently wrote a column about that. I wrote it on Indy Politics and also wrote it for the IBJ. I'm just kind of pulling it up right here because, let's take an educated guess, ladies and gentlemen, or let's just assume that the state of Indiana took all the money from charter and voucher schools. Just say, hey, you know what? We're getting out of the charter business. We're getting out of the voucher business. No more. We're eliminating those funding, and all those kids are going back to the traditional public school that they would have probably come from. Well, here's a news flash. There are about 36,000 kids on Indiana school voucher program, and with respect to the issue of charter schools, I want to say that's about another, I think, 80,000 and some change are in charter schools. So let's just say, for sake of argument, there are 100,000 kids in both, the charter schools and the voucher schools. We'll just kind of leave it at that. Guess what? All those kids, they're going to come back to the traditional public school. Either you got to hire more teachers because you want to keep a normal size class, which is usually about 25. You're going to have to hire at least 2,000 more teachers. Otherwise, you've got crowded classrooms. And guess what? the money you're going to get from the charters and the vouchers is probably not going to cover, those 2,000 something odd teachers, because the amount of charters family get, charter schools per kid, is about $3,000 less than the money that goes to the traditional public school. Same thing, ladies and gentlemen, with the voucher program. Yes, I'm a big supporter of vouchers. Yes, I'm a big supporter of charters, but the facts are what they are. And if you have all those kids go back to the traditional public school, you are going to have to hire more teachers. If not, you're going to have much bigger classrooms and bigger class sizes. Is any of this registering with some people? Now, so where's all this going? And by the way, if you've got any questions, I am more than happy to take them, because I got a few more minutes here. I got to go drop off a tuxedo with the dry cleaners. I know, first world problems that I have in my universe here. But I wanted to make sure that at least from the very least, that we were having this teacher pay discussion. A lot of people think it's just a dollar amount, for Indiana teachers, and it's not. It's more complicated than that. It's where do people live? How long have they, been teaching? What is the cost of living where you are? Are you a single person? Do you have kids? I mean, all these different factors come into play, when we talk about dollars and we talk about things like teacher pay. And unless people are willing, to look at this in context and put this in perspective, this whole discussion is a big giant waste of everybody's valuable time. Now, when the teachers show up on Organization Day at the legislature on the 19th to protest, God love them, God bless them. I'm a big believer, as you all know, in the First Amendment and the right of citizens to express their grievances with their government. You'll never see me have a problem with that. I do have a problem, though, with some of the schools that use e-learning days to do this, because unless there's actual e-learning going on, one can make an argument that the school districts are committing fraud, against the state and against the parents by using e-learning day to give teachers the day off to go to the legislature, and there are no e-learning assignments or e-learning going on, because that is not what e-learning was for. E-learning was for when the kids get snowed in on a snow day and people don't have to make it up down the road, which I thought was interesting, that some schools have actually scheduled an e-learning day, for the 19th, but I think it's interesting, but they're still scheduling an extra classroom day. Like, well, if your e-learning day is going on, then why would you have to schedule another day for class instruction? Because that's, well, you see my whole point. Anyway, like I said, the moral of the story, ladies and gentlemen, is this. Teacher pay is complicated. It is not an easy thing to figure out. And you have to look at it in context. You got to look at it in perspective. And once we start to do that, then I think we can have a legitimate and honest and rational discussion on the issue of teacher pay. Got any questions or comments? You guys are free to leave a message on Facebook, and I'll try to get back to it a little bit later this afternoon. Or you can follow me, abdul@indypolitics.org. Feel free to shoot me an email or other kind of message, all right? Hey, thanks for taking around and listening to me kind of do my little teacher pay discussion chat. And by the way, do I not have the coolest poster in the universe behind me? I don't know if you guys can see the Superman, because I can't see it here because I got the little wave things in front of me. But yes, my office rocks. You folks take care. I'll talk to you. Bye-bye.